Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Piecing It Together with Annika and Ben. I am Ben. Annika is off for this particular pod because she was kind enough to cover for me when I was out resisting the Empire. So this is her pod off. I am obviously here piecing it together, the official podcast of the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. If you are interested in finding out more about the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, you can find us at presbypeacefellowship.org. You can find information about the multitude of things we're involved in, but specifically accompaniment programs, gun violence programs, peace church programs. So if any of that piques your interest, please go to the website. But also make sure you like us and subscribe to our little podcast. We are a scrappy little group trying to have a voice among many voices. I am very honored today to be joined by two women who I have a great deal of respect for, particularly for their work in the realm of gun violence prevention, and restoring common sense to the dialogue about gun violence. I'm joined today by Margery Rossi and Jan Orr-Harter, both ferocious members of the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves because I will do a poor job of it. So, Margery, if you would like to introduce yourself to our little audience here.
Thanks, Ben. So my name is Margery Rossi. I serve as the Minister for Gun Violence Prevention for the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. I've been serving in that role since March of last year, but I have been doing this work with Jan in the Peace Fellowship since about 2015, and doing this work before then since about 2011. And as always, as a volunteer up until last year. So we'll get into a lot of detail about why we're doing the things we're doing and how we're doing the things we're doing. But I'll leave it for there at the moment.
And Jan.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jan. I am a retired Presbyterian pastor. I live just outside of Fort Worth, Texas, and I serve as a volunteer with the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship Gun Violence Prevention Ministry as the moderator of their working group. And I also do a lot of editing of the resources that we provide to congregations.
So, Margery, you kind of alluded to what I'm going to ask you first. So, I have found in my own work, I've been working in gun violence prevention for some time now, that everybody kind of has an in, right? It's not, I really don't know that it's, I don't know what the in is for most folks. In my case, I've lost two family members to gun violence. Gun violence was actually part of my decision to join the ministry. I converted to Christianity very late in life, and violence became sort of a theme, right, in my own faith. And so violence prevention became a major source of ministerial energy for me. I also think it happens to be my scriptural center. I just can't stand violence. And so I want to eradicate it from the earth, right? And so all of us, though, right? I mean, this is an issue people feel passionate about, whether you are with us or not, right? And so what Annika loves to say this jokingly, what radicalizes us, right, to start doing this work. And so, Jan, why are you involved in gun violence prevention?
Which one of us did you want to answer first? Do you want Jan?
I'm sorry, Jan.
Actually, go ahead, Jan. Jan's been doing this longer than me.
Well, specifically, the gun violence prevention movement was a gift to me from the late Jim Atwood. Jim and I worked together from 2006 on Peace Fellowship fundraising, and then on his books. I had a small role in helping him with those books, doing study guides for congregations. But my radicalization, like you, Ben, being averse to violence is also my scriptural and faith center. It actually goes into my childhood. I think that probably the first thing that impacted me was the assassination of President Kennedy. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. He had just been there that morning. It was such a big deal. Our neighbors were there seeing him. That assassination um, started a thinking process in my brain. Just a few years after that, there was really, I guess, one of the first school shootings. It's not actually the first school shootings, go back in American history, but at the University of Texas in Austin, a discharged Marine went up into the big tower and shot for an hour and a half with an arsenal of weapons. And I was 12, and this was a horrifying thing for Texas. He killed, I think, 15 or so people, including a woman who had an unborn child. Um, and then, as I look through my life, there's just acts of gun violence, just interactions with gun violence, suicides. I learned that there had been 3 generations of gun suicide in my family. Um, 2 dear friends committed suicide with guns. Um, even just being a child in vacation Bible school, I can remember, I think I was about 11 or so. With the baby boom, you always had to think, what do you do with all these kids in the summertime? Somebody at vacation Bible school got the idea that we should go visit the police department and the jail. And so they take this group of children down into the crime lab of the Fort Worth jail. And I was short. I was right about at counter height. And I'm looking at something like inches from my nose, and it's a blue t-shirt completely splattered with blood. And the policeman, told us that this was a man who was killed yesterday with a gun. And this thing is right at my face. And so I just see the roots of feeling that we can do better than killing one another with guns.
That I mean, it's just a reminder, right? How long we have been witnessing this, like how many times we've seen this play out. Margery, what brought you to this?
Well, like Jan, I remember incidents in my childhood where I was just appalled by violence um, within my own family, as well as what was happening in the world around me. I remember being, I remember watching the news and seeing the Vietnam War on the news and watching the body counts every night. And I remember as a very young child asking why we were, our country was across the world in another country killing people, and why it was only them who were dying. Why wasn't there body counts on both sides? And and I remember my parents being appalled by the question and not really knowing how to answer. And they were appalled that I actually understood what was happening, because I was, at the time, I remember, very young, elementary school. I remember another incident in my childhood where my older sister and I, who were, we had regular conflict as children. We were having just another one of our endless arguments, and there was my mother, who was just beside herself with 3 young children under the age of 6, and we were arguing, and she went and got a weapon from my father's closet, and stood there with it and said, does anybody need this? If you can't stand each other, does anybody need this? And I was so completely undone by that as a child. I just remember thinking that it didn't matter how mad I was at my sister. I never wanted to participate in that kind of violence. And I have never actually, it took me years to really understand that moment for my mom. But my mom was not only in that moment, having to manage 3 very young children. My younger sister had a number of health issues, and my mom had had another child who had recently passed away. He was uh, born and died very shortly after birth, and she was just, at her wit's end. So fortunately, there was no tragedy from that moment, but it was a moment that could have gone very poorly. And that stuck with me growing up. And then as I grew up and realized, that there was just inconsistencies around what we were learning in church, and how we were being taught to live out our faith, and then what was actually happening in the world, I was the constant thorn in the side of not only my parents, but the local priest, who did not like my questions at all. And constantly had to deal with them, and drag me off to my parents for talking to. Uh, so I remember having conversations about why it is that we call ourselves. I grew up Roman Catholic. Why do we call ourselves pro-life when there's all of this war happening? Why, and how do we justify war? And so I was always the one asking those questions. So I think, not nonviolence was also a scriptural center for me, without necessarily having that language as a kid. And when gun violence particularly really became a thing that I felt compelled to respond to, was in 2011, when Gabrielle Giffords was shot. At the time, my husband was serving as a member of the city council here where we live in the Hudson Valley of New York. And I had 2 very young children. And she and others were shot. And the next day, one of the members of my congregation came to worship and was just sobbing about he knew her and had worked on her campaign. And so he just stood up and was lamenting about this incident. And so I went to speak with him afterwards, and I said to him, "What can we do? How do we respond? What do we do with this?" And his answer, he was never one to be dismissive. And his answer to me was, "I'm so tired of the church not doing anything. If you actually mean that, let me know." And then he kind of walked away, and I was kind of shocked. And then he handed me a policy statement from the church a few days later, which was called Gun Violence and Gospel Values, Mobilizing in Response to God's Call. And he handed it to me and said, "If you were serious, read this and call me." So I did. And I called him, and we ended up doing 2 things that were really important. One was leading a study for our congregation to really figure out what are we called to. And the other thing that it did was gave me language to talk with my own kids, because at that point they were freaked out at the idea that their dad was going off to city council meetings. They understood he was in the government. This other person was in the government, and somebody had shot her, and they were afraid. What if somebody comes to a meeting and shoots at people sitting in the meeting with Poppy? And so it gave me language, and it gave me courage to face all of that, not from a place of fear, but from a place of faith.
Yeah, I remember, I have, after my brother-in-law was shot and killed, my sister, quite frankly, was a saint in the aftermath of that, and did work that, with her kids, that I can't even imagine having to do. Right. But I remember her for a while she had to constantly reassure them that the guy couldn't find them, because they were afraid he was going to come to the house. Right. And to this day, every now and then, right, you have to sort of remember that this guy's in prison, right? This guy can't get you. But he comes up for the whatever parole and stuff. But I think both of you touched on something that I wasn't actually going to start with, but I am, because it's sort of like, I think it's kind of the meta, right, of this thing, and something that I have been noticing a lot lately. If you just look back, right, on recent history, for example, you know, this past weekend, right, the weekend after June 19th, that was the same Saturday that we bombed Iran, right? There were two mass shootings at the same time, in two different places, right? Within the same 2 hour window, basically. And, multiple people are killed, multiple people are. And so I started to obsess over this idea that the only thing that really seems to trickle down in our culture is violence. And so, the economy doesn't do it. We know that. But for some reason, right, there is this, and I think people dismiss this pretty easily, because we're supposed to be, we have to defend ourselves. And, I know that we want to respect the military and all that stuff, but I don't see how there cannot be a link between, an atmosphere of war, right? And the affirmation of violence as a positive way to solve problems, right? And so I was thinking about this a lot because when Columbine happened, for example, which was kind of a massive, shock to the nation, we were dropping major bombs in Europe at the same time, right? I mean, we were killing people. And then, we were sort of freaking out about this. And I'm like, do we not see the connection here? Right. That at some point, and this past week, because I have a mental problem, I was watching congressional hearings all week. And I need help, but I watch C-SPAN all the time, but I have watched our discourse devolve, right, into this kind of base violent discourse, right, where all we're really doing is fighting with each other. Like nobody's conversing anymore. Right. I guess I want to give you each a little minute to just sort of riff on, how you feel about this connection between kind of the meta violence, right? The violence that's happening that we justify easily, frankly, too easily, frankly. And the violence we find, I guess, unjustifiable, but do we, right? I mean, I don't know, right? I mean, now it just seems like I almost take it for granted that if somebody has political disagreement, they have a manifesto. Right. And so, I mean, we all have a manifesto. It's 2025, right? We're all fighting for something. But mine doesn't include shooting lawmakers when I don't agree with them. Right. So I guess just, Margery, I'll start with you. Just kind of riff on the idea, right? That there is this, I think there's a connection. I think you can't not make the connection. And I feel like that might be one of the threads we haven't quite cut well enough. And that, it fuels a violence that becomes resistant, right, to our efforts to stop it because it becomes very justifiable. So go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thanks. I absolutely agree with you that there are deep connections between individual violence, interpersonal violence, national violence. It is all connected. It all has roots in the same kinds of thinking. One of the most profound stories I think that I've ever heard or seen that really explores that was an animated series that I remember watching with my kids years ago, called Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. The main character, whose name is Aang, is a Dalai Lama-like figure where he is reincarnated over and over again into the same position. And his position in his world is that there are 4 different nations that he is the balance point between the 4 nations. And they are elementals. So there's earth, air, fire, water. And in the first episode, what you find out is that he goes missing and the world goes out of balance. And then there's the Fire Nation kind of begins to become this authoritarian, threat to the rest of the nations. That's the premise of the show. So when Aang reappears, he finds out what has happened while he was missing, and I'll let you watch it to see all the details of that. But essentially, Aang has to come up with he has to go through his own journey of learning. He has to reclaim his place, and the most critical piece of it is he needs to go through the experience of learning how to face this extraordinary threat and real violence non-violently. That is who he is as a person. And everyone else tells him that there is no way of doing this without violence. And so the entire series is an exploration into Aang's journey to discover if it's possible to overcome violence non-violently. It is an extraordinary look at that. And what it really does beautifully is this interplay between individual violence, interpersonal violence, community violence, international violence, and look at how it is that those things all dovetail and how they fit together, how they don't fit together, what choices people need to make, how we need to behave individually, interpersonally, and how that impacts on what we do and how we think about our duty and our fealty to our nation. Fascinating, extremely well done story. And years ago, I actually ran a retreat for youth and young adults, using that as a way of looking at what Jesus did. And we did a compare and contrast between the two. And actually, I will not claim that I did that all by myself. I did that with my dear friend, Rick Uppard Chase. We took a group of kids to a cabin in Vermont, and we had them look at the scriptures and at just war theory and at confessions from the book of Confessions. And we did a compare and contrast with what was happening with Aang. And what they came away with was astounding, profound, deep understanding that Jesus also was inviting us to look at our own individual place in the bigger picture. And that Jesus himself had to, when he went off into the desert after his, baptism with the Holy Spirit, that what he was doing was discerning what his own place was, what his own role was individually, interpersonally, and nationally. And that was a lot about what he was doing and what that interaction was with the temptations, with the devil, what those were about. It was amazing to me how clearly those kids understood that and what they took away from it. So I think that there is a lot that we can learn about our own place, about what our role is individually and nationally, just by looking at that story of Jesus. And also, if you need a shortened version, if you like anime, I'm going to recommend Avatar: The Last Airbender.
And Jan, in your introduction, like you talked about the Kennedy assassination, for example, right? We often forget that was a very public act of gun violence, right? That it sort of shook us as a president being assassinated, right? But it also, right, started to sort of we started to see, right? I mean, that people weren't just disagreeing anymore. They weren't just having weird conspiracy theories anymore. They were acting, right? And so I'm just curious about your response to the same idea.
Well, as a Christian, I see the connection between national leaders devaluing the lives of our enemies and local citizens devaluing the lives of one another. It is compounded by the fact that the nations of the world are armed to the teeth with military hardware, and we put all of our genius and resources and courage toward military approaches to things. And at the grassroots level, the grassroots is like dry hay. It's 500 million guns circulating in our society. So when people have the least little bit of difficulty dealing with an issue, there is a gun available to them, not very far away. So there is a connection between this, and there's a connection that we have all these weapons at the top and at the bottom. I would say, first of all, the role of the church is to proclaim that the value of life at all levels, and it is a sanctity of life issue, gun violence. But I would also say that the movement to prevent gun violence has to be a very big place. It needs to involve veterans. It needs to involve military families. It must involve gun owners. It needs to involve the gun industry. We cannot significantly reduce the amount of gun violence until gun owners make a decision that they're going to lock up every gun in America. And so it has to be a big place, regardless of how people feel about other issues. We need to engage a broad swath of our society in making the changes that are needed here. The gun industry could be a huge blessing. If Jim Atwood advocated for smart gun technology 20 years ago, there was the capacity for the gun industry to make guns that would only recognize the grip of the owner of the gun, and would not fire for anyone else. And in their decision to not compromise on anything, that was their basic approach, the gun lobby rejected that technology. But think what a blessing it would be to our country if every gun was only usable by the person who owned the gun. Think how many lives of children would be saved.
Yeah, I recently got to see a smart gun lock, actually. And they are remarkable things. I mean, they can store like 50 fingerprints. It's like a whole, it's like a little computer that, secures. So this is why I wanted you to, on the podcast, because you sparked 17 ideas while you were talking. But, so, and I want to do two things, right? I want to specifically talk about kids for a minute. And then I want to specifically talk about the church, and what we are or are not doing, in response to this. And because, recently I was giving a sermon that I think might have been loosely on gun violence. I talk about gun violence a lot. And I made the statement, the kids are not okay. It breaks my heart, right, to think that I have nieces and nephews growing up in this world. Because I know this world breaks their heart. And I know how dangerous it is. And, my husband's niece, was not involved in a shooting, but there was a mass stabbing at her high school. Right. And so we spent, a very harrowed 20 minutes trying to make sure she was okay. But, here's my problem. I get so pissed off about the idea that if anything else was killing children in these numbers, we would have the most comprehensive team of people studying it on the face of the earth, and they would do nothing but try to stop it, right? That would be our primary goal, right? It would be like eliminating polio, right? We would need to get rid of this thing because it was killing our children in record numbers. Well, guess what? It is killing your children in record numbers. So why people's hair isn't more on fire, I don't know. Maybe the political divisiveness has made it impossible for us, to have a conversation based on feelings anymore. I don't know. But there has to be something, right, about this idea that kids are in danger. That speaks to people, right? I mean, I have to think some part of us wakes up in that thing. And I know that the Peace Fellowship, for example, and Jan, I'll let you expound on this, has been doing work on educating kids, right? And sort of giving them the information that it takes to handle this issue. The problem is nobody can handle this issue. It is fundamentally disorienting, traumatic, and emotionally scarring regardless, right? It doesn't matter. You can have the best therapists on earth. This thing has residual effects. And so I am now concerned, like, what does it mean for kids to have gone through this generation of death? What does their next generation of leadership look like? Right. I mean, we've seen the inspirational, look, kids are on fire politically right now, right? They have had enough. And thank God, because somebody has to have enough. Right. And so they've done actual real things, right? They've made real powerful transformation happen, not legislatively, but they've decided to become legislators, right? And so, they're doing this in a way that I find incredibly inspiring and powerful. Jan, what are we doing with kids, the Peace Fellowship specifically? What is your biggest concern, right, about how this is affecting kids?
Well, thank God for all the young people who are turning their fear and their anger into action. We often get this question at the Peace Fellowship: how do we talk to our kids about gun violence? And as if there is some magic thing that you can say to make children feel better in the face of this. And we always turn it back around and say it is not the responsibility of children to prevent gun violence. It is not the responsibility of children to not touch a gun that they see unsecured. It is the responsibility of adults. And the best thing that we can say to our children is, I am taking action. I am getting involved. Come with me to vote. I have to go to a meeting tonight to help prevent gun violence in our town. The best thing you can do for your children is to show them that you are taking action. There are other ways to involve children in this movement. In our congregational toolkit in the pastoral section, there are ideas such as involving children at times of mass shooting, in worship and prayer and vigils, encouraging them to send notes, to make prayer flags and send them to the church nearest the shooting, to make children feel part of the movement of the Holy Spirit to prevent this. But fundamentally, it is not the child's responsibility to prevent gun violence. It is the responsibility of adults.
I would agree. In fact, in my own story, I had a tween cousin, right? It's like second cousin who was shot in the face with a handgun, right? At a friend's house, and killed. And what galls me to this day is not a single adult has faced a charge while a kid is in prison, right, for having done this. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I have a whole other thing about treating kids like adults. Anyway, so Margery, you talked about your kids, right? I mean, this is something that you have had discussions about. I find that children are remarkably wise about the issue of violence. And I also find that they are proof to us that we are not naturally programmed to be this way. You have the floor.
So I would absolutely agree with you that children are naturally wise about what is right and wrong, and we spend a lot of our time and energy teaching children what is right and wrong, and then they're like hypocrisy, meters. They really understand when what we're saying and what we're doing don't match up. So a few years back, another retreat that I did with a different group of kids, I invited kids to write prayers about gun violence. and it was in 28. When was Parkland? Parkland was 2018. It was the year after Parkland, and it was we were putting out a kit of prayers and worship resources for churches to use. That was the same weekend a year after Parkland, after that shooting, which actually happened on, it was February 14th, 2018, which was both Ash Wednesday and Valentine's Day, which was just, there were so many reasons that was just a horrible combination of things in the same day. And so a year later, we were planning to put out this worship resource for not only recognizing that day, but also the Universal Day of Students in that same weekend.
Mm.
So I invited kids to write psalms, prayers of confession, various prayers that could be used in worship. And I gave them format, like here is what a psalm of lament is. Here's the format for it. And then I gave it to a group and I invited them to write prayers. Those prayers are in our toolkit. And they are also going to be featured in our upcoming action circles that will be piloting and rolling out this summer about protecting children from gun violence, and those will be available for folks in churches to learn how to do. And the prayers that were written by kids in middle and high school are just every time I read them, they gut me because
I've
they
used them.
are.
They are hard.
Yes, they are hard. And these were kids at the ages of 11 and 12 and 14 that were just profound acknowledgement of their own experience and their own suffering and their own acknowledgement of the pain and anxiety that they were living with around guns and gun violence, and the recognition of the failure of our country to protect and keep our own children safe. So if we need to understand and as adults take in how kids feel, read those psalms, read those prayers, and then go do some personal reflection on what we need to do as church, as people, just as adults living in America.
There is a line in that book, or in the toolkit, in one of those children's. I don't know if it was in a prayer or a psalm, but it has stuck with me since the first time I read it out loud, which was during my church does an annual gun violence vigil, and I read it as part of the vigil, right? But the line was, "It just keeps happening."
Yes.
And I started weeping, right? Because I thought, like, for a little kid, right? I mean, to express that level of almost hopelessness, right? Was too much. I mean, I couldn't deal with it. Jan, did you have something? I thought.
Yeah. The line that sticks with me from those prayers is, God grant us a fresh start. We have an example in the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship of a child who grew up to be a gun violence prevention activist. Rachel Supfin is a member of our gun violence prevention working group. She was a child in the Virginia Tech community during that shooting at that college. And her school went on lockdown. She was in lockdown during that. And gun violence followed her through her childhood. And she became an advocate against the death penalty and against gun violence. And today she's a local pastor in New Jersey, but she's also one of the leaders of our Guns to Gardens action circles. And so that's an example of somebody who grew up in that lockdown generation, who converted her and her fear into being a very skilled activist.
So, because I have to bounce around a bit, I turning our energies to the church for a moment. And I always preface this. I don't think I've told my full background story to our audience yet, but I'm a converted atheist, right? I was not a baby Christian. My only spiritual influence was my deeply Catholic grandmother, which is why I am still basically a quarter Catholic. And so, I love Mary and I have all these sort of Catholic tendencies. But anyway, but it means also that I think part of my contribution is that I come to the church with an outside perspective, right? And so I tend to critique the church pretty harshly. And so I will apologize ahead of time that I lean toward criticism when it comes to the church, right? And I will defend that all day long, but that's not the point here. The point here is what is starting to frustrate me. Look, the Presbyterian Church is so far ahead on this issue that I want to give them credit for it. Like, we are light years beyond other denominations who are trying to deal with this, right? We have been very in your face about it. I mean, we have overtures come out almost every year about it. I think Annika and I have described to the audience what overtures are, so I won't do that again. We have been very forthright on this. One of the things, though, that I think is maybe not said enough, and this is another one of my little, we'll call this, Pastor Ben's personal privilege focus, right? These are things that I'm hyper focused on, right? Is the idea that violence is not a natural state. It is not a fruit of the Spirit. It is not anything that was put into you in the process of your creation, right? God breathed love into the human creature, right? Breathed community into the human creature, breathed connectedness into the human creature, right? We were made for peace. And I know we struggle with that, right? And maybe free will was the problem, right? We never should have had that stuff. But, but the very first act after the fall was domestic violence, right? A brother killing a brother. And so we know, right, that we have a relationship with this. And one of the things that frustrates me about the church is that I think mainline denominations like us, like Presbyterians, we're afraid sometimes to talk in sort of higher moral terms or to talk in sort of moral language, right? I don't think gun violence is anything for us but a moral issue. From the church's perspective, this is a moral issue, right? Yes, it's also a public health issue. Yes, it's also a variety of other things, but this does damage to the human spirit that the church must be concerned about. And it is fundamentally immoral to take a human life, right? It is a sin. It's one of the worst ones. It is one that's mentioned everywhere. Right? You are not given that permission to hurt people. And so, but the other thing is, and what I'm getting to is, I believe the church has the strongest message in this argument. In fact, I think if we were more vocal, we could actually make some dents in the sort of moral discussion of gun violence. And the reason I say that is because I think, number one, I think a sense of community is essential to the elimination of violence. I think personal connection is essential to the elimination of violence. And we have that, right? The church is supposed to be predicated on community. It's supposed to be predicated on unity, right? In diversity. We're supposed to be a people finding peace always, right? We are also told, look, there to me is no greater statement against violence in the Bible than on the night of Jesus's arrest, when Jesus says, "No more of this," right? After the guy on the other side is attacked with the sword, right? That statement to me is absolute biblical validation that violence is no longer in our toolkit, right? Even in the face of the gravest circumstances, we are not given permission to do this, right? And so Jesus's act right after that was to restore it, right? To restore something back to a peaceful state. And so, I talk about gun violence and people think I'm a Pentecostal minister because I talk about morality so much, right? I don't care what people's views are about a platitude of other sort of moral issues. I don't care. I don't care how you feel about me personally as a gay person. I don't care how you feel about a lot of other things. You should care a lot about people being killed by other people, right? And so I don't know why every church, right, doesn't have an active gun violence prevention sort of arm, because this is a disgusting thing. Like, we cannot sustain this, nor can we sustain our silence, right, as an institution, as a larger institution, right? Greetings, folks. This is Pastor Ben. Sorry for my interruption of your listening to the podcast. I just wanted to let you know that we had such a great conversation that we decided to cut this podcast into two because it is a bit lengthy. So it will be in two segments. And so this will count as the official end of the first segment. So if you have been abruptly interrupted, the next episode will be out soon, and you can finish the rest of this conversation. I encourage you, please, to check out the next installment to finish this conversation. This was a fantastic conversation. So if you have time to do that, please come back and listen to the rest. Thanks, and peace be with you.